And now, Shohei Shigematsu, Craig Robbins, Bjarke Ingels with Oshrat Carmiel.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Oshrat Carmiel. I'm a freelance journalist, and I spent over a decade writing about real estate for Bloomberg News. And I am excited to introduce this all-star panel of creativity and vision for a discussion on resilience and how they go about designing and planning projects that will adapt to and withstand the test of time. And I'm going to go right to introducing the panel. I have Bjarke Ingels, founding partner of the Bjarke Ingels Group, the global architecture and design firm. Craig Robbins, Chief Executive Officer and President of Dacra. His many neighborhood transformations includes the Miami Design District. And Shohei Shigematsu, New York-based partner at architectural firm OMA, large portfolio of urban and public space designs, some of which he'll talk to you about today. So I'm going to start with Bjarke. He's got a bunch of interesting projects that could really exemplify resilience and sustainability, including first self-sustaining floating city. You want to start there?
Yeah, thank you. And maybe just, since we are in Miami, resilience is definitely sort of a major subject. And I moved to New York in 2010, and a few years later, maybe you can put on the first slide. Oh, yeah. A few years later, the Hurricane Sandy came and sort of wiped out most of Lower Manhattan. And as a result, we got invited by the Obama sort of Hurricane Sandy Recovery Fund to see if we could actually design the waterfront of Manhattan in such a way that would not only make it resist the next Sandy, but actually make it sort of more accessible and more enjoyable for the people living there. And then that became the dry line, sort of this sort of idea of a high line that will keep Manhattan dry, and essentially taking the necessity of protecting the city from the water around it as an invitation to actually make the waterfront more enjoyable and more accessible. And then sort of moving on from there, like we got in contact with UN Habitat. And since this is a reality that sort of most major cities in the world are waterfront cities, and they will all be dealing with this. So we're now working on this project in Busan, where we are trying to, we will be building the first 3 floating city blocks, and here you can see what it's gonna look like. So essentially, to try to build the infrastructure for a floating city. To begin with, it's economically viable as an expansion of inner city waterfront areas where you have a limited supply of real estate. But once the technology gets mature, the kind of the renewable infrastructure, the water treatment, the waste treatment, we will almost have this kind of modular floating island that once French Polynesia or the Maldives really start sinking, you can deploy a kind of floating land. And there's this beautiful idea that the coral reefs actually grow with the water levels if you don't build a city on top of them. So you could imagine a scenario where you slowly move the cities off these atoll islands, turn them back into nature reserves, and then the population, the city is basically floating, anchored adjacent to a wildlife reserve. So essentially, like, of course, both projects really dealing with the fact that we should have planted the trees 20 years ago.
Thank you very much. We'll get back to and Craig, we would want to start with what you're doing in Texas with your first solar residential project.
In Austin, along with a partner of mine, Brookfield, we've been collaborating with Tesla Solar. Tesla Solar has been retrofitting a lot of houses, but hasn't really been used for scalable development. And we saw a big opportunity and think that if it's used for scalable development, it'll expand much more. It is a brilliant, incredible technology, and applying the expertise of Brookfield and the expertise of Tesla is really turning it into something that I think will grow a lot. We're at the early stages, but we've done 10 houses, learned a lot, and taken that and are applying it to the next 100 right now.
Wow. Thank you. And Sho, I know you have a project that's very local and near and dear to people who live here. Reef Line, you want to start with that?
Yeah. Are you done?
We're going to circle back. We're definitely.
Okay.
I want to make sure we introduce all the projects, but there's a lot of great detail. We'll get back to.
Sorry.
We'll try.
Okay, so can I have my slides on?
Craig, did you want to say something more? Or?
No, I can talk about the design district.
Let's talk about the design district. Let me just get that, because it's near and dear to Miami as well.
Just briefly, our business philosophy is different than most developers. We don't look.
Can we have the slide back to?
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Sorry.
We don't really look at the highest and best use for a piece of land. We buy lots of property in an area and think about how we can create a sense of community. And philosophically, what that does is it puts you in a position where you want to make each thing that you're doing make the whole community worth more. And community starts with a little area. It then becomes your city, your state, your country, and ultimately the world. And so in a very local sense, the design district was an abandoned neighborhood virtually. It was crime-ridden. People didn't believe that you could actually do something off of Miami Beach in the city of Miami. And so in a local sense, just transforming that neighborhood would make a big difference to the community. But then doing it in a way where it was equally dedicated to culture, with mainly art, architecture, and design, but lots of cultural activations as it was a place to do business. That also was kind of an out-of-the-box transformative approach to a neighborhood. And then in a national level, thinking about how that would change the way people perceive furniture design. In the United States, furniture design was just sold in these fortress-like malls, and you needed a license to get in. Or retail generally is in mall-type environments, and turning it and doing it in a cultural-type place. And then that ends up implicating what people do, not only around the country, but around the world. And most importantly for this conference, it's the first Category 4 Gold LEED certified neighborhood development in the world. And so that was a way where we could really implicate not only these business type issues and these cultural issues, but merge in the importance and the advocacy for environment.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that.
I'm just going to start, but I was very lucky to be involved in such a representative project for Miami Beach that is kind of a convergence of different ambitions, like tourism, environmental protection, and also art, which is called Reef Line. Everything that's called line with a line nowadays, as you heard. But it's ironically that when Miami Beach actually reinforced the beach, they actually, eliminated a lot of the natural reefs along the coast. So this project is spearheaded by Jimena Caminos. I don't know if she's here, but basically, in order to recreate the reefs along the shore, instead of putting concrete blocks to revitalize the reefs, we are putting art, and we are the master planner of that. And in order to, create a destination of art and culture under the water, so we are inviting a lot of different artists. And we are also doing one sculpture, which is this one that looks like a sea creature, which is a combination of 8 spiral stairs. The stairs becomes obsolete under the water, so we wanted to test how the meaning will change, but also to create a kind of arena-like condition where the reefs you're immersed within the reef, like this. But I think it really represents how Miami Beach or Miami is growing, with a lot of different ambitions of architecture, art, and culture, and tourism and also environmental protection. And I think this project really shows how Miami is leading this kind of the notion of convergence. Thank you.
And so one thing, I'll go back in the same order, and I hear this in all your comments, and you said, you know, when the technology matures, and you said, we're going to do the first 10, let's see how the next 100 goes. So the thing I would want to ask you, and I'll start with you, Bjarke, is you're not just building, and there's no template that you're working off of. There's a lot of anticipation, there's a lot of technology that either doesn't exist or needs to exist, things that you have to come up with. So can you talk about some of the challenges of essentially kind of building for the future and really essentially coming up with things that may not exist?
Yeah, yeah, but I think actually, maybe just to be annoying, to actually really emphasize that I think that the good news is actually that that so much already exists, and that I think more than anything, the challenge ahead of us, it is less about inventing things that have not yet been invented. It is actually more about really identifying the solutions that are totally ready and available and scalable. So in that sense, I would say, and with scale comes basically the things we make a lot of, they become better and better at a lower and lower cost, like cell phones and computers and television screens and washing machines, etc. So what we really need to do is to find a way to bring scale to these things. We did a few studies. We're trying to look actually at the environmental challenges on the scale of the planet. And just a few things that surprised us when you benchmark all the different ways of producing energy. Today, solar and wind actually outperforms all of the fossil fuels. And another thing we found is that if Europe would take all of their agricultural waste, so essentially like the straws they leave on the fields, or sometimes we burn them or whatever, if we would take all of that and turn it into biogas, we could basically cut off the pipeline from Russia. So in that sense, all I'm saying is that the good news is all the solutions are available. All we need now is to have a plan, a holistic plan to implement them systematically at scale. And the more we do it, the more the powers of productization will give us higher and higher quality at a lower and lower cost.
Thank you. And Craig, can you talk about scaling up, into a full residential neighborhood from?
So I thought what Bjarke was saying is really interesting, because there's two types of innovation. There's innovation where someone has to really invent something new, and then there's innovation where you take what's out there and you just get out of the normal habits and you find a way to do it differently. And our habits, sometimes it's economic, sometimes it's political, kind of tend to restrain us. And so, like, what we do is pretty obvious. There's nothing that we're inventing that isn't out there. We're just taking these different components and applying it into a neighborhood. One of the things that was really interesting to me when we got this LEED certification is how easy it is and how relatively inexpensive it is. Like, this is something that everybody can do, and it's not a big deal. It does cost more, but when you look at the cost of building impact fees or other expenses that you have in business and the limited return that you get on them, and then having a place that really stands for this sense of community, I think it makes a difference. And what we've seen, it's hard to attribute what component of the neighborhood is making it more valuable. But all of these things, the fact that it's pedestrian friendly, the fact that it's a real creative environment, the fact that it is LEED certified, all of that has led to where people appreciate it more. And so it's actually getting a much higher return than you would get in a normal metric.
Right.
And therefore, like, we're doing something that I think is positive for our community and those different levels of the community, but it also happens to be, make a lot of business sense.
That's the best marriage of all worlds. Would you like to talk about also some of the idea of challenges, new technology, and how you move forward?
Yeah, I think that right now we have a lot of simulation softwares available. So it used to be that like LEED for me is a little bit like kind of post-rationalization or adapting the kind of notion of sustainability to the typical notion of buildings. But nowadays you can simulate during the process of design the wind, the solar, many things, and that can shape the architectural siding and shapes to some degree. And I think that's a kind of encouraging thing for me that used to be that the architecture is made and then you kind of simulate the environment, but now actually in the process of designing you can, environment can shape the architecture, which is a kind of, what architecture used to be in the past, coming from Japan also very much, catered to the specific environment. And I think that's quite encouraging shift that we are also trying to do more and more. But also one more thing, I'm also interested in like the contradictions of like environmental ambition versus the what people want. For example, office building. People want more and more transparency, more glass, more views in residential building too. But the environmental, let's say, rigor is prohibiting a lot of buildings to have all glass. And I think the glass itself needs to perform more and more while it has to be more and more transparent. And I think that kind of contradiction interests me to actually deal with as a design issues.
And Craig, you're building an office building too. I mean, is that something you're grappling with?
We are, but again, if you, with our office building, we've worked with Ray, who's part of Architectonic, and Bernardo and Lorinda's son. It's a great local firm, and he's the next generation. But we've also included Daniel Arsham, who's an incredible artist, happened to go to school in Miami, grew up in Miami, and had a studio for years in the design district. And so we're replacing, extra glass with terraces,
cast plaster,
plants, cast plaster, exactly. And so there are ways where people think they want something, but if you offer them something new and better, you can tackle this issue and also be different than everyone else. So it isn't the same boring kind of structure that everyone else is using.
But I think there's also something about this this notion Shohei was mentioning of convergence that in many ways, I think especially it may be a very American thing that there is this notion of front of house and back of house. And there's this notion that you almost don't see the back of house, even though the back of house is very often right in your face. And it's this kind of fenced off area with some gas guzzling chillers, or it's the roof that's full of like a village of galvanized metal boxes. And I think what sustainable technology offers is actually this idea that we're opening the headquarters for Google, where the entire facade is made out of these dragon scales that they've been nicknamed, but it's essentially tiled photovoltaic panels. And we're opening what we believe is the most sustainable factory in the world in Norway, where the entire factory is built with locally sourced mass timber, which means that when you go into the factory hall, it's not a drywall and sort of fire sprayed steel beams. It's basically mass timber walls, mass timber beams. You feel almost like you're going into a museum, but it's because the building is made out of something that can actually, ironically, sustain fire, because the wood fire protects itself. It takes a while to burn through the wood. So you end up having this amazing opportunity where the structure of the building becomes the architecture and the finish of the building, where the technical installations actually become the beautiful material that is the facade. So instead of having to first solve all the practical utilitarian in an ugly way, and then see how much are you going to spend on marble on the facade afterwards, you can actually sort of combine the two in a more sort of holistic approach.
Less cladding, the better.
Yeah.
Trying to conclude because who's going to have the final word? Less cladding, the better.
That's the takeaway. Less cladding. But yeah, is there? We got 25 seconds, and I don't want. But I don't know if that's enough to cover. Your Hoboken project. Probably.
Oh no.
Any takeaway?
No, it's okay.
Yes.
We're doing also post Sandy thing in New Jersey, which is completely opposite. We're more surgical. And against Bjarke, who has a big kind of line, we're kind of very surgical, acupuncture-like.
I'll just say it's a great honor for the first time performing at the New World Symphony. On stage.